Despite Constantinople, then the capital of the Roman Empire, being founded by and taking its name from Rome's first Christian emperor Constantine, the church had little success with marketing monogamy and ending the world's oldest profession there. A contemporary literary piece known as the Babylonian Talmud, written in the 5th century AD, records a conversation between two rabbis which took place in Roman-controlled Jerusalem. One rabbi lauds the Romans for their great architectural feats exemplified in new bridges, roads, and bathhouses. The other promptly rebukes him, saying, "All what they made for themselves. They built marketplaces to set harlots in them, baths to rejuvenate themselves, bridges to levy tolls for them." The world's oldest profession was clearly thriving. The pimps of the day would visit the impoverished hinterlands of the empire to buy young peasant girls and rent them out in the city. This would be the lowest class of prostitute. Actresses were also prostitutes, but considered a step up from the brothels. Often this profession was a family affair, with mothers putting their daughters to work, and it is indeed here we meet the future Empress Theodora. Born to an actress and a bearkeeper working in the hippodrome, she was, along with her two sisters, also put to work, quite literally, both on and off the stage. But that's just one version of her story. Another, written by a bishop, relates how she was known as Theodora from the brothel. This suggests an even worse fate and tougher circumstances, as women working in brothels were in essence owned by a pimp. They'd be given some loaves of bread and a hut to do their business, but that was pretty much it. An incredibly grim existence, followed by an untimely death, was the norm for the unfortunates caught up in said trade. Procopius, the court historian, in his infamous book Secret History, also wrote that Theodora worked in a brothel in Constantinople for rates so low that even slaves hired her, as she was not yet old enough to perform properly and had to take on the role of a male prostitute. You can read into that whatever you like, but regardless of your interpretation of said statement, life obviously must have been quite horrific for young Theodora. Only when she became sexually mature did she start performing in the theater as a common courtesan. She had horrible acting skills, but slowly climbed the corporate ladder and did succeed on stage, which mind you still means she was a hoe, just a higher class one, as actresses all did extra work back then. It was her onstage antics, though, that caught everyone's attention, as she gained infamy for her debauched performance based on the Greek mythological play Leda and the Swan. In the story, Leda, who was a Spartan queen, was raped by the god Zeus, who had taken the shape of a swan in order to seduce her. Whilst being a swan, Zeus weaseled his way in with her, seeking refuge in her arms, whilst being pursued by an eagle. Their encounter resulted in a child we today know as Helen of Troy. Leda likely had no idea that her close encounter with this swan would become a popular theme amongst Renaissance painters 2000 years later, for in ultra-pious Christian Renaissance Italy, painting a woman banging a swan was more acceptable than rendering her with a man. But let's get back to Theodora, who in Constantinople drew huge crowds to see her acting out Zeus disguised as a swan banging poor Leda. Come showtime, taking on the role of Leda, Theodora paraded onto the stage before laying down on the floor with her vagina spread eagle towards the sky, whilst slaves poured buckets of grains of barley into her, which geese would pluck and eat. I'd imagine this would elicit a fair bit of applause. Procopius wrote this on her performances: "There was no shame in the girl, and no one ever saw her dismayed. No role was too scandalous for her to accept without a blush. She was the kind of comedienne who delights the audience by letting herself be cuffed and slapped on the cheeks, and makes them gasp by raising her skirt to reveal to the spectators those feminine secrets here and there which custom veils from the eyes of the opposite sex." Around this time, she also became a mother, and after hours she'd offer herself to low bidders at other social gatherings. Procopius wrote on this too: "On the field of pleasure she was never defeated. Often she would go picnicking with 10 young men or more, in the flower of their strength and virility, and dallied with them all the whole night through. When they wearied of the sport, she would approach their servants, perhaps 30 in number, and fight a duel with each of these, and even thus found no allayment of her craving." She also purportedly lamented how God had only given her 3 holes for pleasure. Why not 4? The line between fact and fiction is likely somewhat blurred when it comes to the accounts of her exact sayings and actions, as society has never been kind to those who don't conform to our strict social mores. Nevertheless, she was clearly one of the unlikeliest candidates ever for savior of Rome or the title greatest Roman empress of all time. Yet, that is what she arguably became. So how the hell, after all the events I just described, did she manage that? Aged 16, she traveled to Libya, Keep in mind that this was Roman Libya and not the Arabic-controlled Libya of today, accompanying the governor whom severely mistreated her. After 4 years, he kicked her out, and she worked her way to Alexandria and up to Antioch, undoubtedly doing in those places what she'd been doing her whole life up until then, before she arrived back to Constantinople. There some say she changed careers and became a wool spinner. Procopius, however, makes no mention of this, instead noting her name was a byword beyond that of other common wenches on the tongues of all men. How she met Justinian, the future emperor, is unclear, but it may have been in the Hippodrome where they both supported the same team, the Blues. Regardless of how it happened, Justinian fell for her and she became his courtesan. This meant quite the upgrade for the, by now to put it mildly, experienced lady, as she was moved into a palace. There she was showered with lavish gifts and other luxuries. Procopius even wrote that Justinian taxed the populace more than ever to fund these offerings to Theodora. Justinian was only de facto ruler at the time, but already calling the shots in Constantinople. Theodora was given the title patrician, or aristocrat if you will, and was even consulted on matters of statecraft due to her intelligence and life experience. There was only one problem. There were laws in place forbidding the upper classes of Roman society from marrying hookers, even high-class ones. Such people were not worthy of rolling with the elite. Eventually, Justinian swayed his uncle, who was still emperor, to alter the law, and it became legal, for him at least, to marry a reformed courtesan. Procopius wrote, "For no thought of shame came to Justinian in marrying her, though he might have taken his pick of the noblest born, most highly educated, most modest, carefully nurtured, virtuous, and beautiful virgins of all the ladies in the whole Roman Empire, a maiden, as they say, with upstanding breasts. Instead, he preferred to make his own what had been common to all men." The emperor died 2 years later and Justinian was crowned emperor. His wife Theodora thus became Empress of Rome, or the Byzantine Empire as we call the Eastern Roman Empire today. The most helpless of the helpless had risen to become the most powerful of the powerful.